So, Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to our session on Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we're going to look at a high-level overview of what we can expect as we get into the Srimad Bhagavatam with Canto 1. But before we get to Canto 1, let's just have a little bit more background about the Srimad Bhagavatam. Some facts for you to ponder over. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is known as the Bhagavata Purana. It is one of the 18 Puranas. It's also known as the Mahapurana. And as we discussed in the last class, the entire focus of Srimad Bhagavatam is bhakti. Bhakti towards whom? Towards Lord Krishna. So this Bhagavatam is made of 12 cantos. So each canto can have many, many chapters, and each chapter has many, many verses. That's why it's called a canto. So there are 12 cantos, and there are a total of 335 chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam itself says in the 12th canto that it comprises of 18,000 shlokas. But some of us are a little bit more logical, so we may end up counting the actual number of verses. So if you actually count the verses, there are 14,094 verses. And Srila Prabhupada writes in the preface to Srimad Bhagavatam to Canto 1 that this Srimad Bhagavatam is a bona fide commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, which is also written or compiled by Srila Vyasadeva. So even the Bhagavatam comes in disciplic succession. But just a quick recap in terms of how the Bhagavatam is aligned to the various parts of the body of the Lord. It does not mean that this is literally the body part of the Lord. It's just that how you begin to take darshan in a temple of the deity. We always tell everyone in Vaishnava culture, in ISKCON, what is the proper way in which one takes darshan of the deity? You begin with the lotus feet, then you move slowly up until you reach the lotus face of the Lord and the forehead and head of the Lord. So just like that, Prabhupada writes in the preface that the qualification to read the Srimad Bhagavatam is that we have to follow it systematically as it is written, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. We should not jump ahead, because if we jump ahead, we may not understand. So you must remember that Srimad Bhagavatam is not a chronological narration of events. These events and pastimes of the Lord are not arranged in a chronological fashion. So some of the pastimes of the Lord don't even happen in our planet. For example, the Gajendra Moksha. It doesn't happen in our planet. Even the appearance of Narasimhadev does not appear on our planet. So some of the pastimes of the Lord, when the Lord appears, it's actually on different planetary systems. So think about it. The Bhagavatam is not restricted to what is happening in India or in this globe called Earth. But it is a wonderful view of Vedic scriptures, of Vedic culture, wherever it is practiced in this universe. Therefore, just like we take darshan of the Lord, beginning with the lotus feet of the Lord, here as well, the Padma Purana says that cantos 1 and 2 are considered to be the lotus feet of the Lord. We always say that devotees are very attached to the lotus feet of the Lord. that they don't want to let go of the lotus feet of the Lord. They're happy to be at the lotus feet of the Lord. You know, if somebody passes away, we say they attained the lotus feet of Hari or Krishna. Meaning, you know, our attitude is always going to be one of service. And a servant should be at the lotus feet of his master. So cantos 1 and 2, a reference to the lotus feet of the Lord. And I was listening to His Grace Gauranga Darshan Prabhu, who gave some really, really wonderful lectures, summary lectures on each of the cantos. As a matter of fact, I was reading this book. If you ever get an opportunity, you should try and buy this book, although you can always keep buying books. This is called the Bhagavata Subhodhini. And Prabhu has very methodically, along with his team, summarized each canto. These books are meant to be a study guide, actually. So it's helpful for those who will be doing the Bhakti Vaibhav course, which focuses on the first 6 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. So some of the content that you will see on the slides today are actually from this book. I've just re-represented it in a different fashion than how Prabhu has articulated in this book. But it's the most wonderful book. You know, sometimes when we read very voluminous literature, by the time we finish first chapter and you're somewhere in the 6th chapter, you've forgotten what is in the first chapter. And because our mind is so feeble, well, at least my mind is feeble, it's hard to connect the dots as to what is actually happening. So it takes wonderful Vaishnavas who are steeped in the study of Vedic scriptures to really tell us how to actually view what we're reading. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So one view we're going to look at is a quick, like a 1 or 2 line summary of each of the chapters. But then if you go, say, 60,000 feet higher, how do you see the entire Canto 1? Right now here, the Padma Purana is telling us how to see the entire 12 cantos, which is the Canto 1 and 2 is the lotus feet of the Lord, and cantos 3 and 4 are the thighs of the Lord. And if you go up higher, you come to the navel of Lord Krishna, which is Canto 5. If you come up a little higher, you're reaching the chest of Lord Krishna, which is Canto 6. And a little bit higher, you reach the shoulders and the arms, which is Canto 7 and 8. And you go higher up, and you come to the throat of the Supreme Lord, which is Canto 9. Canto 10, which is the most beautiful, sublime, all-attractive lotus face of Lord Krishna. Therefore, Canto 10 is completely about Lord Krishna and his beauty and his beautiful pastimes with his devotees in Vrindavan. Of course, with his pastimes in Mathura and Dwaraka as well. So Canto 11 is considered to be the forehead of Lord Krishna, and then Canto 12 is the head of Lord Krishna. So this constitutes the 12 cantos. So this is the 335 chapters, 18,000 verses, 12 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, Lord Krishna talks about how the Bhagavad Gita was revealed by him to the sun god Vivaswan. And from there on, it came down in disciplic succession. So similarly, Srimad Bhagavatam also comes down in disciplic succession. The Bhagavatam itself tells us what the disciplic succession is. So if you go to Canto 3, Chapter 8, and you read a few verses from Sloka 2 onwards, maybe to Sloka 2 to 6 probably, it tells you how the Bhagavatam actually came down. But the first person to receive the Srimad Bhagavatam was Brahmaji, where Lord Krishna transfers it heart to heart. So this is called the Chatushloke Bhagavatam, which comes in the second canto. The second student of Srimad Bhagavatam was of the 4 Kumaras, the oldest or the chief of the 4 Kumaras is called Sanat Kumara. He actually hears the Srimad Bhagavatam from Shankarshana. And if you read this Canto 3, I was just reading it very briefly when I was looking at the shlokas relating the disciplic succession of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It says how the Sanat Kumaras who were living in the upper planetary systems come all the way down the Ganges because Shankarshan is way at the bottom of the universe, holding the entire universe on top of the heads of Anantashesha. So Shankarshan here is Anantashesha. So they come all the way down, traveling through this holy river Ganges that takes on different names based on where it is flowing in this cosmos, until they reach the lotus feet of Shankarshan. And there they glorify Shankarshan and they request the Lord to speak to them about Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's how Sanat Kumara actually hears the Srimad Bhagavatam along with his 3 brothers. Further, this Sanat Kumara, the chief of the Kumaras, explains this to Sankhyayan Muni. Sankhyayan Muni further explains this knowledge to Parashara Muni and Brihaspati. And Parashara Muni in turn gives this knowledge to Maitreya Muni. And then Vidura hears the same knowledge from Maitreya Muni. So actually, Canto 3 is a conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Muni. And in that context, this disciplic succession is mentioned. Of course, we also know that Srila Vyasadeva compiles the Srimad Bhagavatam on the instructions of his spiritual master, Sri Narada Muni. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam itself says what is the various topics that are covered in Srimad Bhagavatam. So if you come to the 2nd canto, 10th chapter, Shloka number 1, there is, in that one shloka, the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam is listed. So let's just briefly look at the 10 topics and then we're going to come into Canto 1. So the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam are Sarga, which is the primary creation by Mahavishnu. Then this primary creation talks about the core basic elements that are created by the Supreme Lord. It is those raw elements that Brahmaji uses to make all of this secondary creation, various types of bodies, right? We said in the last class that Brahma creates 4 broad categories of bodies. So that's called Visarga. Then that's something called Sthana. Sthana means all of these various planetary systems, the 14 planetary systems in every single universe. The structure of those planetary systems is also the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam. Porshana means protection. How do we protect ourselves considering that this place is Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam? The 5th topic of Srimad Bhagavatam is Uti. Uti means the creative urge, the urge to do something, the urge to act on your desire. This is called the creative impetus. The Bhagavatam also covers the topic of how the various manus change, their different reigns. So this is called the Manavantaras, the change of the manus. Then another topic is the Ishanukta, which is essentially the science of God. Nirodha, meaning once you have understood the science of God, there's an opportunity for you to go back home, back to Godhead, where you really belong. Which means you are liberated, which is another topic, which is Mukti. And Ashraya, finally, the summum bonum, or the ultimate good for all of us, is to take the shelter of the Supreme Lord. So this is a brief look at the Bhagavatam itself. Now we will come to Canto 1, and I am going to just briefly touch upon what's covered in each of the chapters, and then we'll look at a summary slide of Canto 1. At the higher level, how is this Canto 1 actually organized? So if you look at it, Canto 1, there are 19 chapters in Canto 1. And each chapter has a particular flavor. So as we go through this, we will look at what, at a very high level, we look at what is the main theme of each of the chapter, what is the particular pastime that is narrated in that chapter. So there are 19 chapters and 808 shlokas in Canto 1. And the first shloka, which we just read, which starts with Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The first 3 shlokas are very important in Srimad Bhagavatam. The very first shloka itself defines God. There are 7 or 8 points that are mentioned in the very first shloka of the very first chapter of the first canto, which defines Bhagavan for us. It explains that Sri Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. Then the second shloka says, it uses the word Kaitava Dharma. It says that actually what is listed in the Vedas that talk about the 4 Purusharthas, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. It refers to this Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha as a cheating religion. It takes you down a path where you practice specific aspects of religion so that you can make a living. And because you make a living, you are able to satisfy your desires. And then because you're satisfying endless amount of desires and never seem to be happy about it, then maybe 1 in a million may look at liberation. So it actually refers to this process of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, which is called the Purusharthas, as Kaitava Dharma. It is cheating religion because it actually takes you away from God. And therefore, that particular shloka, the second shloka, says, actually, all you have to do is study the Bhagavatam for you to go back to Krishna. All one has to do is to hear the Bhagavatam every day, all the time, to go back to Krishna. So it establishes the position of this specific scripture as something that directly connects you to Krishna. And the third shloka in the first canto, first chapter, actually tells the readers, it invites them to step into the world of Srimad Bhagavatam and to relish the nectarian pastimes of the Lord in his various avatars. So the first shloka is about Bhagavan. The second shloka exalts the position of Srimad Bhagavatam itself. And the third shloka, Vyasadeva is inviting the readers to relish this book, Srimad Bhagavatam. And then the fourth shloka onwards begins with the Naimisharanya sages who are gathered there on the banks of the river. And Suta Goswami happens to come by. And that's how they ask the 6 questions. Generally, they're concerned about the welfare of the people. So that's the essence of the first chapter. The first 3 shlokas being very, very important. And the 4th shloka onwards begins with the Naimisharanya sages inviting Suta Goswami and asking him pertinent questions because they are worried about the welfare of the general people. Then in the second chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Suta Goswami starts explaining, but before he begins to answer the questions, he offers his obeisances to Shukadev Goswami, from whom he has heard this Bhagavata Katha. And that's when he recites this shloka, Narayanam Namaskritya Naran Chaiva Narottamam. This is actually recited by Suta Goswami. So before he begins to speak about the Lord, little Mangala Charan, little offering of obeisances to those who are exalted devotees. So in the second shloka of the second chapter, Suta Goswami says that any dharma that we follow that does not connect us to Krishna is a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. And it's in that second chapter, which is a very important shloka again for us, where he uses the word Shrama eva hi kevalam. Every activity of ours is of no use if it is not done for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So when we come to the third chapter, because some of the questions asked by the sages were, why did the Lord appear? If he did come, what were his pastimes? We heard that he takes on different other avatars. Can you tell us about those avatars? So in the third chapter, the various incarnations of Krishna, including the three Purusha avatars, which is Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. The Leela avatars are also mentioned. Then if you come to the fourth chapter, the fourth chapter actually talks about the history of Srimad Bhagavatam. How did Srila Vyasadeva actually divide the Vedas? He gave it to his respective disciples to expound on it. But then the chapter ends with Srila Vyasadeva being quite morose. He's unhappy after having compiled all the Vedas. It's at that time that his guru appears, Narada Muni. Narada Muni counsels him and tells him the reason you are unhappy is for two things. You have not glorified Bhagavan and you have not glorified Bhakti. You spent too much time in the Vedic scriptures focusing on Karma Kanda. How if you do this, you'll get that. If you do that, you'll get that. So there was no scope for you when you were writing and compiling the Vedas for you to glorify the Supreme Lord. It's all about what is it that humans want and how can they go about getting it? By performing various rituals, sacrifices, penances, etc. So when we come to the fifth chapter, Narada Muni himself speaks about his past life as a son of a maidservant, how he loses his father and then eventually loses his mother as well at a very young age. But it just so happened in the ashram that they were living in, there were these Bhakti Vedantists who came to spend their Chaturmas there. How he got an opportunity to serve them as a very young child. He even got prasadam from their banana leaves. And he, along with his mother, get an opportunity to serve this Bhakti Vedantists. So he says how he came to the spiritual path. And right after he has had the opportunity to interact, take darshan, take the association, and get the prasadam of these wonderful Bhakti Vedantists, his mother passes away. So he explains to Vyasadeva how I was just like a vagabond, traveling here, traveling there. I just didn't know what I was supposed to do. How Lord Krishna gave me a beautiful vision. And after that, I didn't get that same vision anymore. And I kept searching and searching and searching and traveling and traveling and traveling. So in the 6th chapter, there is a much more serious conversation that happens between Narada Muni and Srila Vyasadeva. And how the Lord actually appears in his heart and how the Lord speaks to him directly. Then in the 7th chapter, Narada Muni has left, and now the student Vyasadeva has begun his meditation before he writes the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in his meditation, he sees that the Jivatmas are going to suffer quite a bit in Kali Yuga. So in order to benefit them, he decides to glorify Lord Krishna at the instructions of his spiritual master. So he rectifies his 2 mistakes, which is in compiling the Vedas, he has not glorified the source of the Vedas, Lord Krishna. And in compiling the Vedas, he has not glorified the relationship between the Bhakta and Bhagavan. So Narada Muni had told him, you rectify these 2 mistakes. And that's what Srila Vyasadeva does. So in the 7th chapter itself, as you can see here, the son of Drona is punished. Who's the son of Drona? Ashwatthama. How Ashwatthama sends the Brahmastra in the direction of Arjuna, and Arjuna is panicking, not knowing what he's supposed to do. So he turns to Krishna and asks Krishna, what am I supposed to do? How can I counteract such a powerful weapon? And at that time, Krishna tells him that weapon can only be countered with another weapon exactly the same. And therefore, Krishna guides him. Ultimately, Ashwatthama gets captured. He's brought before Draupadi. But much to the consternation of the 5 brothers, Draupadi forgives him. Even though he was the cause of the death of the 5 children. But they figure out a different way to punish him and they set him free. So that's the 7th chapter. In the 8th chapter, which is a beautiful chapter, it's about the prayers of Queen Kunti. So from verse 18 to verse 43, Prabhupada had actually taken these prayers and converted them into a separate book. The purports that Prabhupada has written to these beautiful prayers by Kunti Devi is quite sublime. So that's the 8th chapter, primarily Kunti Devi's prayers. Then in the 9th chapter, you recall, at the request of Kunti Devi, Krishna stays back in Hastinapur, spends time with the Pandavas, and there he ultimately, we witness the passing away of Bhishma Dev. So in the 9th chapter, there are 10 verses, 11 verses, called the Bhishma Stuti. Bhishma Dev glorifying Krishna. So from verse 32 to 42, the Bhishma Stuti is there. So in this particular chapter, Bhishma gives some very wonderful instructions to Yudhishthira Maharaj on a wide range of topics, including topics like what is Raja Dharma, what is Tri Dharma. And Bhishma Dev also explains the beauty of Krishna to Yudhishthira. So it's a beautiful chapter, the 9th chapter. So after this chapter, in the 10th chapter, Krishna, who has stayed back in Hastinapur, decides he has to leave. He cannot stay there anymore. So he departs for Dwaraka. So chapter 10 is the residents of Hastinapur feeling intense anxiety and separation, knowing that the Lord is about to leave. They are just despondent. So the entire 10th chapter is about the departure of Lord Krishna from Hastinapur. And therefore, the 11th chapter is the exact opposite. The residents and citizens of Dwaraka are experiencing great joy because finally Lord Krishna comes back after a very long absence. So how does he make his entrance into Dwaraka? How he is received, how he is greeted, how he is worshipped, how the citizens of Dwaraka decorate their house in anticipation of seeing the Lord, how they welcome the Lord back. So 10th chapter is separation, 11th chapter is about meeting. So this is what happens between the devotees and the Lord. There is intense meeting and there is an intense separation. There is meeting and separation, meeting and separation. That's the mood of the relationship between the Bhakta and Bhagavan. It's in separation that your love actually intensifies for the Lord. Yes. So, so this is the contrast between chapters 10 and 11. So chapter 12 is about the birth of Parikshit Maharaj. So the Brahmanas, at the time of birth, normally your horoscope is drawn up and the astrologer tells the parents what is in store for that child. So similarly, there were Brahmanas who came, who made all kinds of predictions about the future of Parikshit. And hearing these predictions, it made Yudhishthira Maharaj very, very happy that Parikshit is going to be a great king. The grandson is going to be a great king. So in the 13th chapter, if you recall, Vidura has left on travels. He does not want to witness the war. He's left the palace and he's gone on his travels. So in this particular chapter, Vidura actually comes back from his pilgrimage. And what is the first thing he does? He chastises Dhritarashtra. He says, "You are so old. You have no shame. You're still so attached to material things, even after your sons have left. You are still hanging on to this palace. How long are you going to stick around here?" And he uses some very harsh words and he says, "You are like a dog taking food from Bhima." Now, of course, Vidura very cleverly uses the name of Bhima. Definitely, Dhritarashtra was not happy hearing this because it was Bhima who had killed his beloved son, Duryodhan. So this way, when Vidura speaks to him quite harshly, to awaken him, to jolt him out of this stupor of being completely addicted to material things and not just willing to let go. Somehow, through this exchange between Vidura and Dhritarashtra, Dhritarashtra's consciousness is awakened by this chastisement and he departs. Gandhari also leaves and so does Vidura. So all of them have left without the knowledge of Yudhishthira Maharaj. So Yudhishthira Maharaj is quite despondent. Where has everybody left? Where is my uncle gone? Why did they leave? He's quite distraught. And Narada Muni consoles him, saying, "Look, it was time for them to leave. You need not be distraught." So Yudhishthira Maharaj thinks maybe he's done something wrong. That's why they all left. Maybe he was not a good host. That's why they left. So you will see the intense anxiety and despair of Yudhishthira Maharaj, hearing that Dhritarashtra had left, Gandhari had left, Vidura had left. So when you come to chapter 14, the Lord also disappears. He goes back to his eternal abode, and there is descriptions of various inauspicious signs. And Arjuna, who had accompanied Krishna all the way to Dwaraka, when he comes back to Hastinapur, he confirms the horrible news that Krishna is not with them anymore. So having heard this devastating news, in the 15th chapter, the Pandavas decide enough is enough. It's time to retire. So they decide to go to the Himalayas, and Draupadi and Subhadra accompany them. And through this journey, they go back to the spiritual world. So the 16th and the 17th chapter, as you can see, how Parikshit Maharaj receives the age of Kali, because the minute Lord Krishna leaves, Kali Yuga has begun. So all of the bad omens and signs are there that an inauspicious yuga is about to start. A difficult chapter when the cycle of yugas is about to start. So the 16th and 17th chapters talk about the background of Parikshit Maharaj, how he was such a powerful king. He was an honorable king, a pious king. How because of good governance, there was prosperity everywhere. But then one day, he comes across this personality called Kali. And he's ready to kill this personality because this personality was beating up the cow and the bull. And it's the king's duty to protect the cow on the land. But Kali very cleverly tells Parikshit Maharaj, I'm also your citizen. You are supposed to protect me. You can't just kill me. So being compassionate, Parikshit Maharaj says, okay, that's fine. You are a citizen, I agree. So Kali says, so where should I stay? Where can I make a comfortable house for myself? And Parikshit Maharaj tells him, wherever there is animal killing, wherever there is prostitution, wherever there is drinking, and wherever there is gambling, you can go and reside in any of those places. And Kali tells Parikshit Maharaj, but wait a minute. In your kingdom, none of these things take place. There is no animal killing, there is no prostitution, there is no drinking, there is no gambling. Where can I make my residence? Because this doesn't exist in your kingdom. If you want me to take shelter there, it doesn't exist. These places don't exist. So hearing this, Parikshit Maharaj says, okay, so you can do one thing. You can take shelter wherever there is gold. Therefore, Kali takes shelter of gold. And in the 18th chapter, as you can see here, Parikshit Maharaj is actually cursed by a Brahmana boy. So Parikshit Maharaj is traveling through the forest. He comes across the ashram of Samika Rishi, and he has not been received. Normally a guest should be received, their feet should be washed, they should be given a nice seat, they should be given a drink of water. But Samika Rishi is deep in trance. So getting very angry, Parikshit Maharaj takes a dead snake and puts it around the neck of Samika Rishi. Now, the son, Shringi, who is actually taking a bath in the river, but is a powerful Brahmana, he immediately understood that something had happened to his father and his father had been insulted. So he immediately curses Parikshit Maharaj to die within 7 days through the bite of a snake bird called Takshaka. But what is Parikshit Maharaj's response to this incident of this curse? He is, after all, the king. He need not have tolerated the curse. He could have punished Shringi. But he's such a pious king that he welcomes this curse as good news. He accepts it as a legitimate punishment for what he had done in a fit of anger. So in the 19th chapter, Parikshit Maharaj decides, it's time for me to give up my kingdom and I'm going to fast to death. I have 7 days to live. I'm not interested in food. I'm interested in understanding what is the purpose of life and how I can get out of this cycle of birth and death. So when all the sages hear that Parikshit Maharaj has been cursed, they all come to the palace. They want to witness the death of this glorious personality, this glorious king. So the king has handed over his kingdom to his son and goes in search of sages who can give him some answers. It is then that Shukadev Goswami appears, and everybody is so happy because Shukadev Goswami is an exalted devotee of the Lord. It is there in the 19th chapter that Parikshit Maharaj begins to ask questions as to what should a dying man do and what should he not do. So based on these series of questions that Parikshit Maharaj will ask Shukadev Goswami, it sets the stage for Canto 2, where Shukadev Goswami begins to respond to the questions posed by Parikshit Maharaj. So if you remember, the first canto begins from the 4th shloka with the sages welcoming Suta Goswami. They are asking questions of Suta Goswami. Suta Goswami has started answering their questions. And by the time you come to the end of Canto 1, you have Parikshit Maharaj who is cursed. And in the 19th chapter, he asks a series of questions of Shukadev Goswami. And Shukadev Goswami begins to respond to those questions. So now let us look at how the Canto 1 is actually structured. So we've looked at each chapter at a very, very high level. But if you look at the overall Canto 1 with its 19 chapters and 800 odd verses, Part A is Suta Goswami's answers to the 6 questions of the sages of Naimisharanya. As we discussed, the first 3 shlokas are like the prelude written by Srila Vyasadeva. He defines who is the Supreme Lord using 7 or 8 specific Sanskrit words in that first verse. In the second shloka of the first chapter, he glorifies Srimad Bhagavatam. And the third chapter, he is inviting us to taste the sweetness of Bhagavatam. We said, because Shukadev Goswami has tasted Bhagavatam, when a parrot pecks on a piece of fruit, that fruit is supposed to be sweeter. And therefore, as we prepare ourselves in Canto 2 to begin to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from the lotus lips of Shukadev Goswami, we can enjoy and relish the sweetness of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the first 2 questions that the sages ask is, what is the ultimate good for humanity, considering that Kali Yuga has started? And what is the essence of all of the scriptures? Because there are so many scriptures for us to pick and choose from. But if we don't have the time to read all of that or the interest to get into all of the scriptures, what is the ultimate conclusion of all the scriptures? So to both these questions, Suta Goswami says, devotional service is the answer. What's the ultimate good for humanity is to worship Krishna. The essence of all scriptures is to bow down and surrender to Krishna. So the answers to the questions asked in Shloka 9 and Shloka 11 by the Naimisharanya sages, the answers to these two questions is given from chapter 2, Shloka 6 to 29 of Canto 1. Yeah. So 1.2, 6 to 29, meaning Bhagavatam, Canto 1, chapter 2, verses 6 to 29. So that's how you read these numbers. Initially, it may be a little bit confusing on what this numbering system is. So 1.1.1 means Canto 1, chapter 1, Shloka 1. 1.1.9 means Canto 1, chapter 1, Shloka 9. Therefore, 1.2.6 to 2.29 is Canto 1, chapter 2, shlokas or verses 6 to 29 gives the answer to the first two questions asked by the sages. What about the next four questions? The next four questions, question 3 is, why did Lord Krishna come? That is asked in shloka number 12 or chapter 1. What are his various avatars? So the Purusha avatars are discussed, or the question is asked rather, in shloka number 17 of chapter 1. And what are all the other avatars of the Lord? That is question that is asked in the 18th shloka of chapter 1. And the answers to these questions are actually given in various shlokas by Suta Goswami. So the Purusha avatars are described in Canto 1, chapter 2, 30 to 33, in Canto 1, chapter 3, shlokas 1 to 5. The Leela avatars, the 21 Leela avatars of the Lord are described in Canto 1, chapter 3, shloka 6 to 27. And then the question was asked, what about the Lord's disappearance? If the Lord has disappeared, where has religion gone? Where has dharma taken shelter? And Suta Goswami says, not to worry, even though the Lord has left, dharma has taken shelter in Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, there's no difference between Srimad Bhagavatam and Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered a literary incarnation of the Supreme Lord. So that answer is given in chapter 3, shloka number 43. So this is part A of Canto 1. What about part B? As we mentioned, part B talks about the history of Srimad Bhagavatam. It begins with Srila Vyasadev's activities in chapter 2, from shlokas 14 to 31, how he has compiled the Vedas, how he's feeling morose, he's worried about the Kali Yuga Vasis, how he compiles the Mahabharata, he writes the Puranas, yet he's not happy with, after doing so much writing, he's not happy with his work. So then in chapters 5 and 6 of Canto 1, Narada gives instructions to Vyasadeva. What is that? It is very important to describe Lord Krishna's pastimes and the glories of bhakti. And in that same chapter, these two chapters, Narada talks about his own past life and how he achieved perfection in the association of the Bhakti Vedantists who were actually visiting, and his mother had an opportunity to serve them, and Narada Muni also, as a young boy from his previous life, had an opportunity to also serve them. So after hearing Narada Muni's instructions in chapter 7, shlokas 1 to 10, Vyasadeva begins to meditate. He sees a vision of the Lord. He also sees the external energy potency of the Lord Maya Devi. And then Vyasadeva narrates the Srimad Bhagavatam to Shukadev Goswami, his son, who had taken the shelter in the womb of his wife. So what about part C now? Part C talks about Maharaj Parikshit's birth, his activities, and finally his meeting with Shukadev Goswami. So his birth is described from chapters 7 to 12, his birth, his activities, etc. All the way to chapter 12, Shloka 1 to 12. So the events leading to Parikshit's birth, how Ashwatthama was punished, how Parikshit was actually saved in Uttara's womb, how the Lord enters the womb to protect his devotee, Queen Kunti's prayers, Bhishma Dev's departure, and then the Lord's departure from Hastinapur and entrance into Dwaraka, and Parikshit's birth and how the Brahmanas predict his future qualities. Then after this, the concluding section of part C, if you look at how the Canto 1 is constructed, is all of Parikshit Maharaj's activities are described in the 7th chapter from shlokas 13 to 18. How he was actually enthroned, how Vidura enlightens Dhritarashtra, who then retires, along with Vidura and Gandhari, how the Lord disappears in chapter 14, how Yudhishthira finally puts Parikshit Maharaj on the throne, and then he himself retires and the other Pandavas also follow. So chapters 16 and 17 is all about how glorious of a ruler Parikshit Maharaj was, and finally how he encounters Kali and punishes Kali. And then in chapter 18, Parikshit Maharaj garlands Samika Rishi with a dead snake, and Shringi, the son of Samika, curses Parikshit, which sets the stage for his meeting with Shukadev Goswami in chapter 19. Parikshit Maharaj repents his action of putting a dead snake. He is completely renounced. He's accepted the curse, and he's preparing himself to leave his body in just 7 days. So he meets Shukadev Goswami and he begins to ask questions of Shukadev Goswami. So this is the broad structure of Canto